60.5 million Latinos make up the population of the United States. 15.57 million of those being from California. Being a Mexican-American born in Los Angeles, I was able to see firsthand the lack of representation of Latinos in the media, and if they were represented, they would be the gang member, the gardener or the helper. Growing up in very diverse cities, I was able to see, with my own eyes, the mixture and appreciation of cultures, but quickly noticed that was not the case when it comes to what was being shown in American media, especially photography. I think representation in the media is extremely important for everyone, but especially the youth. Because growing up and not seeing someone that looked like me in photographs made me think that our history, Latin American history, wasn't important to learn about. I will be talking about the representation of Mexicans in photography with an emphasis in Chicano photography. The term Chicano dates back to the colonization of Mexico. The indigenous peoples were called Mexica, pronounced Mexica, and because the Spaniards did not have a letter or sound in their alphabet that had an handle sh, they replaced it with an X. The first mixed people born from Spaniards and Mexica parents were referred to as Mexicanos, which evolved to Chicanos, which later evolved to Chicanos after the Mexican-American War in 1848. Mexican-Americans were promised citizenship and the right to their property, language and culture, but many were denied by the U.S. government. This led to various uprisings all around California by Mexican-Americans fighting for their civil rights for years. It wasn't until the 1960s where the term Chicano didn't see a rise in popularity and there was noticeable coverage of Chicanos fighting for their civil rights due to photography and news coverage of the civil rights movement. George Rodriguez is one of the most notable Chicano photographers that was able to capture images of the Chicano movement and be a part of the protests. The two images seen were taken by George Rodriguez in 1968 Los Angeles, where Chicano students staged a walkout to protest unequal conditions of public schools for Chicano students. In an interview with NPR, Rodriguez states, "The kids in the walkouts are just youngsters, like 14, 15 years old. They're not violent, they're not trying to hurt anybody, they're just trying to make a statement. But they're treated like criminals." Being a Chicano from Los Angeles himself, he understood the fight these young Chicanos went through and stood by their side recording our history. These young Chicano high school students formed nonviolent protests across Los Angeles, but were met with state police that arrested and beat them for peacefully protesting. Almost a year later, more than 20,000 Mexican Americans marched through East Los Angeles to protest the Vietnam War known as the Chicano Moratorium. The protests were also non-violent till they were met with violence by the Los Angeles police. George Rodriguez was born and raised in Los Angeles and started his photography journey in 1954 in high school, where his friend convinced him to take a photography class. He then worked for a photography lab after high school in Los Angeles for many years where he was able to make connections to photograph many celebrities including Nguyen and the Jackson 5. The Chicano movement, the anti-Vietnam War protests led by Chicanos in Los Angeles, and the farm workers movement intertwined with one another because all causes were being led by the same people, Chicanos. George Rodriguez was able to photograph images during the farm workers movement including images of Cesar Chavez. Chavez was one of the co-founders of the United Farm Workers Union to fight for farm workers' rights. In order to talk about famous historians we also have to acknowledge the issues that came along with them. For example, it wasn't widely known till recently that Cesar Chavez heavily opposed immigrant farm workers, to the point that he would tell his supporters to call the migra on them. Cesar Chavez should be respected for his fight for farm workers' rights, but we must also acknowledge that he was only fighting for American farm workers. The image seen above is George Rodriguez showing an image in his book, Double Vision, released in 2018 to Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta is the other co-founder of the United Farm Workers Union who fought for female rights, LGBTQ+ rights and Chicano rights. She is still alive today and still using her voice for what she believes in. George Rodriguez's impact on the Chicano movement is everlasting, because he was on the sidelines fighting with young Chicanos, but also documenting our history that would otherwise just be memories. Even after years of the Chicano movement and the farm workers movement, both fights still go on. Chicano photographers like George Rodriguez were able to pave the way for future Chicano photographers and Chicano artists in general. Harry Gamboa is another Chicano photographer from Los Angeles that is known for his major series titled Chicano Male Unbounded, started in 1991. Gamboa was inspired to change how Chicano men were seen in society by portraying them in career paths that Chicano men weren't stereotypically seen in. The image on the left is of Humberto Sandoval, a Chicano actor from Los Angeles taken in 1991. The image on the right is of Gregory Bojorquez, a Chicano photographer from Los Angeles taken in 1991. Even though Gamboa started this series of images in the 90s, he continues to add to his series of Chicano men. Gamboa states in an article with Autry Museum of the American West, "I've heard people comment, just from looking at the pictures, that they are gang members. But then they get closer, read the descriptions and discover that the gang members are lawyers, have Ph.D.s, artists and novelists. By just simply adding a description to the person in his pictures he is slowly able to change how these Chicano men are perceived by society." George Rodriguez is an amazing Chicano photographer that was able to use his photographs to speak for themselves in the fight for Chicano rights. He was able to pave the way for future Chicano artists to do what they love. Thanks to him, we are able to see the fight for Chicano rights and explore the identity of being a Chicano.